reconvene the Committee on Educational Policy.
Thank you, Chair Campbell. Will the Committee on Educational Policy please come to order? It is now time for the committee to consider today's consent agenda. Does any committee member wish to remove an item from the consent agenda? Hearing none, is there any objection to the approval of the consent agenda? The consent agenda is approved. Item 4 of the discussion agenda is an information item regarding Recovery with Equity Roadmap. The item will be presented by Dr. Wood, Executive Vice Chancellor for Academic and Student Affairs, and Dr. Josie, Senior Policy Advisor for Governor Newsom and Chair of the California Higher Education Recovery with Equity Task Force. Dr. Wood, please begin.
Thank you, Chair Steinhauser, very much for the introduction. Today, we are very pleased to welcome a very special guest to our July board meeting, Dr. Londe Ajosi, a Senior Policy Advisor for Governor Newsom and Chair of the California Higher Education Recovery with Equity Task Force. The task force was convened in August 2020 to envision a new approach for the post-secondary preparation and workforce readiness in California. In consultation with the Governor's Council for Post-Secondary Education, the task force was comprised of both California national experts in higher education equity, experts in higher education equity and innovation, including several representatives from the California State University, including President Sakaki and former EVC Lauren Blanchard. Dr. Ajosi has joined us today to discuss the task force excellent report, Recovery with Equity Roadmap, and how the CSU's efforts are integral to the state's success. Following Dr. Ajosi's presentation of the board's discussion, our next agenda item will provide an update on the work the CSU is leading in the area of increasing graduation rates and closing equity gaps through our Graduation Initiative 2025. Specifically, we will provide an update on the advisory committee's work and recommendations to advance equity and student success. So now it is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Londe Ajosi. Dr. Ajosi.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Wood, for the very kind introduction. And thank you to the Chancellor and to the board for having me. I'm really delighted to be with you today to present the recommendations from the California Higher Education Recovery with Equity Task Force. Next slide, please. There is so much to share about this work, and while in the interest of time, I think I'll try and keep it brief and squarely focused on the recommendations. I thought I'd just start with a little bit of background so that you understood how we got to this point. Next slide. The task force itself was conceived as a joint effort between the Governor's Office and the Governor's Council for Post-Secondary Education. The Council, as you may know, enables the state to forge a more integrated system for post-secondary education that better serves the diverse needs of students as a part of a cradle-to-career continuum. The Council's origins began in December 2018, when then Governor-elect Gavin Newsom met with leaders from higher education and agreed that institutional leadership together with leaders from labor and from the business community, would serve as his direct advisors on issues related to California higher education. The Governor's Council for Post-Secondary Education was formed in August 2019, and it serves as an independent consultative resource to the governor regarding the economic and social impact of higher education in the state. The council, in its advisory capacity to the governor, does not set policy. Instead, it's really designed to be a sounding board for consideration of policy changes within the segments that can have ripple effects across the entire education system and across the California economy. The council's work is a part of a very broad vision for greater equity and prosperity across the state of California. California for All is really reanimating the idea of the California dream, the idea that every person in this state can achieve a better life, regardless of where they start out. That dream thrives on the diverse talents and a spirit of innovation, which we seek to further cultivate. Next slide. The Recovery with Equity Task Force was convened to envision a new approach to post-secondary education, both preparation and workforce readiness in light of the pandemic. In April 2020, it became clear that our systems of higher education were really in triage, and yet we knew that at some point in the future, the pandemic would subside, and we had a choice regarding how we emerge from the crisis. Would we go back to the way things were? Or would we use the moment to redefine equity and the systems and processes in higher education that promote and sustain it? We chose the latter. Established in August of 2020, the Recovery with Equity Task Force comprised 20 California and national experts in higher education equity and innovation to determine what would be needed to emerge from the pandemic as a more equitable higher education system. Next slide. The task force worked collaboratively to produce a roadmap for California's higher education institutions to recover from the pandemic in a more integrated, equitable, and resilient way than we had been before, more aligned with the economic needs of the state. The task force invites and encourages independent institutions to also participate in this agenda. As you can see from the slide, the roadmap really includes a set of findings that the task force developed, 11 actionable yet interrelated recommendations that focus both on policy changes as well as on changes in practice, and identified the kinds of resources that would be required to bring about those changes, and on next steps for all in the higher education system, policymakers, education leaders, and other stakeholders in order to bring about those changes. While the roadmap developed by the Recovery with Equity Task Force is bold and far-reaching, it's important to note that it doesn't address every single critical issue that California students face. Unpacking and addressing college affordability and broader issues related to public higher education finance, for example, are somewhat outside of the scope of this report. These topics remain an important area for additional and ongoing reform. Nor is the roadmap a to-do list for a single institution or a single segment. Rather, it's a call to higher education writ large to take strong action that will require coordination and collaboration across the segments within regions, within our state, and across regions in our state. Post-secondary education leaders have an important implementation role, with progress on many fronts requiring collaboration with California students, faculty, the K-12 system, political leaders, the business community, and philanthropy. The imperative to recover from this crisis provides a critical opportunity to act upon these recommendations to build a more equitable higher education system that benefits all of California. Next slide. As California seeks to recover from the pandemic, it's not enough to go back to the way things were. California needs to learn from this experience to build on its assets and to reimagine the future. Recovery with Equity will take the effort of Californians across disciplines, from post-secondary institutions to K-12, from human service agencies to local healthcare providers, from business partners to learner-focused nonprofit organizations. Working together, Californians can change the trajectory of the state so that all of its residents have the support they need to qualify for the high-wage, high-quality, high-demand jobs that will drive California's economy. The potential in California is limited only by the talents of its people. The work ahead is no doubt challenging, but the post-secondary sector, with partnerships in communities across the states, can build a more equitable future from the crisis. And together, I think we will make that reality happen. Next slide. So on to the recommendations. The findings of this report will not surprise you, so I'm not going to go into them in detail, but suffice it to say that we found that low-income, first-gen, Latinx, and Black and Indigenous students in particular, in fact, most of the population, of the student population in California's public high schools, are less likely than their peers to finish high school, to complete the A through G coursework needed to apply for admission to UC and CSU, and to enroll and graduate from college. Based on those findings, the task force developed a set of recommendations to address the challenges of post-secondary education and that students and institutions face in recovering with equity from the pandemic. Next slide. The recommendations within the report are a set of really interconnected and interdependent systemic solutions meant to fundamentally shift the way in which California supports all of its residents in an equitable manner to prepare them for and engage them in education and in careers. California's institutions and systems of education are dedicated to serving students, but have to fundamentally change to a learner-centered perspective that is proactive and that prioritizes and supports the structures that will help all learners thrive. To do this work, higher education has to collaborate within and across segments. And the independent institutions in our state, which are integral to the state's higher education system, are invited to join those efforts so that we can really make sure that we have all systems rowing in the same direction. The task force identified 4 guiding principles that really comprise the recommendations. The first, as you see here, is on fostering inclusive institutions. And I will say that in the process of developing the task force report, we spoke with over 200 students. They spoke passionately about the need to feel included within their colleges and universities. The second bucket of activity is around streamlining the pathways to degrees and really thinking about what we need to do to integrate higher education so that admissions and transfer across and between our segments is no longer the barrier or the struggle that currently exists. We also want to facilitate student transitions, particularly looking at the transition from K-12 into higher ed. There was a study done several years ago that shows that California loses approximately 1/3 of its high school graduating population because people simply don't make the transition into higher education. And there's much more that we can do by thinking about high-tech, high-touch options for guidance into the higher education system. And then finally, we need to simplify the kinds of supports that we provide to students so that students are able to access the resources that they need in order to be a student. It frustrates me to know that we have students who are on free and reduced lunch when they are in high school, and suddenly they go to college and they qualify as food insecure, and we wonder why they don't have the support they need, when in fact we knew months before that they were food insecure. The 11 recommendations that we have fall into those 4 buckets. The first 3 are really about the sense of belonging. Students spoke, and others that we spoke to spoke of wanting to get a sense of belonging by ensuring that our faculty, staff, and administrators were as diverse as the student body itself, that we are working to cultivate equity-oriented learning environments where students see themselves in the curriculum, and where faculty have and staff have the cultural competence to really be able to connect with our students, and to retain students through inclusive student supports that help students to feel seen and feel heard without feeling ashamed of the needs that they have. The second priority is around how we facilitate transfer and the connection across and between institutions. We talked about doing that by trying to establish a common admissions platform so that all students who want to attend college in California do so by applying to institutions from a single portal. The idea that all students could access higher education, in fact, because they could go to one single place where perhaps their transcript was preloaded and they would know where they had access because they would be able to see if they'd completed all the A through G requirements. We talked about unifying and streamlining the college admissions process itself, and actually developing an early admissions, a dual admissions process so that students who automatically might otherwise be qualified to attend a 4-year institution Would it be for the fact that they did not have access to all the A through G requirements, could apply to a UC or a CSU, gain admission, potentially even gain their initial financial aid award, but then take the initial courses at a community college. We spoke of the need to develop a common course numbering system and really eradicate the confusion that occurs in higher education, particularly in the community colleges, where students are trying to figure out how to transfer, and yet they don't know when they are taking courses that the same courses in two different institutions qualify for a single requirement. Developing a common course numbering system at the community colleges could facilitate that greatly. In terms of the transition from K-12 to higher education, we talked about high-tech, high-touch advising. There are institutions in the CSU system, I know, that are already thinking about some of this with the advent of chatbots and other kinds of strategies that really help to make sure that students are getting the guidance that they need, so that when they sit down to meet with an advisor, it's really for the kinds of deeper conversations around where they want to go, but not for maybe the reminders that they need in terms of moving along their academic trajectory. And then we want to continue to support college preparation and early credit, particularly in terms of dual enrollment, because it is such an important component of students really feeling a sense of belonging and understanding the requirements of moving into post-secondary education from an early age. Finally, in terms of making sure that we have streamlined supports, we want to look at an integrated platform for students to apply for state services. What would it be like if maybe there was a single place to go and get your CalFresh, get CalFresh and get financial aid and obtain housing? Is it possible to think about an integrated platform so that students don't spend their first semester in school moving around the campus or around town trying to figure out how to create those supports for themselves, which then leads them to not have that sense of belonging in the institution that we talked about earlier. We spent some time wanting to make sure that we were including digital access as an integral part of the basic needs for students. We know that during the pandemic, if students did not have access to hotspots or to computing resources, that they simply were not able to be engaged in their education. And we think that going forward, access to the internet and to digital resources will be, in fact, a basic need. And then there's the issue of overall college affordability and how we ensure that students are both obtaining the resources that they need to attend college, but also that we are ensuring that we are doing everything we can on the institutional side to continue to make college affordable. Next slide. I just thought I'd stop for a moment to talk about some next steps, especially since our budget has just recently been signed by the governor, and the governor and the legislature spent a lot of time really trying to finesse what it is we would need to really execute against a recovery that embodied greater equity. First, they approved $250 million to establish somewhere between 5 and 8 regional collaboratives. What we envision there is not dissimilar to an effort that began about a year and a half ago in Fresno, where we have the UC, the CSU, the community colleges, and our K-12 system coming together, oftentimes partnered with independent institutions, to think about how do we align our systems and create a single educational experience for students so that they don't get caught up in all of the details of moving from institution to institution. And how can we do that with a very explicit focus on career readiness? And so that really is much of what we are focused on there. Those regional collaboratives will include certainly, supporting a variety of regions across the state to really advance many of the recommendations within the Recovery with Equity Task Force as we think about that school to career pipeline and how to do that in a more streamlined way. The budget also included eliminating age and time out of high school requirements in order to remain eligible, to have eligibility for the Cal Grant. And that included approximately approximately $515 million to expand the middle class scholarship beginning in the 22-23 school year. Those taken together will make college much more affordable for a much greater number of students, and particularly from students who begin at the community colleges. They will have support and be able to take and port that support to their four-year institutions should they choose to transfer. And finally, we allocated $10 million to create a common course numbering system within the California community colleges. There are examples such as the Los Rios Community College District, where common course numbering has greatly facilitated students in being able to make the transition to a four-year institution, and we'd like to see that move forward. In addition, we are lifting up in concert with the Council for Post-Secondary Education, a basic needs committee that is intersegmental, where we can really define across our higher education segments, what does basic needs need to look like? Is there a set of minimum standards so that as students move from institution to institution, they aren't finding themselves with different sets of resources, but in fact, that there are a set of base resources that all students will be able to take advantage of. Next slide. There are other opportunities for action that go beyond, obviously, what is presented in the budget. The governor and legislators have a role, obviously, but there are lots of stakeholders that have a role. The segment leaders obviously can develop statewide plans and segment plans that help to implement these recommendations. Institutional leaders can integrate the recommendations into existing campus plans. We think that faculty and staff can participate in professional development and can participate in setting standards for hiring so that we have the kind of diverse population of faculty, staff, and administrators in our systems that we seek to have, and that our students and student associations have a critical role in advocating for these recommendations and providing input about implementation. So we really think that there is lots of room for action by many stakeholders. Next slide. There are obviously also opportunities for action in terms of the CSU itself. One suggestion is that the board and the chancellor really take up an effort to focus explicitly on improving faculty, staff, and administrative diversity. The chancellor and the board of trustees could adopt system-wide policies to bolster DEI across the campuses and standardize data collection so that we understand our bright spots and we understand where we need to improve. There's also a suggestion that campus presidents could support college preparation and early credit by partnering with districts, by partnering with other kinds of local institutions and employers. Campus presidents can create a streamlined pathway that provides intensive advising and early college credit to high school students with a focus, an explicit focus on low-income students and students of color. There's a suggestion for faculty and staff that they could cultivate inclusive and engaging and equity-oriented learning environments. Faculty and staff really can lead the efforts in making teaching and learning more equity-centered and re-envision the curriculum across the board to include the experiences of people of color and ensure that our future professionals know about the kinds of experiences that are embodied in those communities so that we emerge as a culture increasingly culturally competent. And finally, for the CSSA and student groups and alumni, we really encourage their broad participation among stakeholder groups as you think through and design policies. Stakeholders have an important role to play in advocacy, and especially students who may feel strongly about the basic needs recommendations that we mentioned earlier. And so with that, I've covered a lot. Next slide. I really would love to open the discussion and hear your thoughts and questions. Trustee Steinhauser, I welcome the board's comments and questions at this time.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Josie. Are there any comments from the board or for Dr. Josie? Questions or comments? Okay, we'll go with Trustee Sebelius, and then with the Lieutenant Governor, and then Trustee Simon.
Well, thank you, Dr. Arjose, for that nice report and to the entire committee and steering committee to present such a comprehensive accounting of our goals and things that we can do. And I think it's laudable that the CSU not only engaged in statements of willingness to change and improve and to be more inclusive, but to put together a set of very, very concrete recommendations. However, until now, these are also goals only. So I wonder whether we can implement a framework of assessment so that we can go back maybe periodically every year or every 2 years to look whether we have made progress in relation to these goals. And maybe we should set some benchmarks. I think this report is excellent, but only just a beginning. And in order to see it through, see action happen, it would also be nice that we can kind of keep track of it like we do with the graduation initiative, that from year to year we can see how much we have advanced or how much we fell short of our aspirations.
Thank you, Trustee Sebelius. I would certainly welcome that. I think that we recognize the need to have measures and metrics for understanding our progress, but did not want to be overly prescriptive, understanding that each educational segment would need to figure out where the line needed to be drawn. I think from the perspective of the governor's office and the council, we want to be able to aggregate across our higher education systems and our K-12 system how far we've come in achieving those metrics. So that really would be predicated on the fact that each segment would have some means to actually measure the progress that they were making against the goals set out in the report.
Allow me a quick follow-up, please. I very much appreciate this as a faculty member, that your report set goals and strategies, but it's not too prescriptive. And what you said is exactly the way we should proceed. I'm always very concerned when commissions, steering committees, or legislators interfere in the running of the academy, because really the faculty know best. And a good example, I think, is the graduation initiative, where the state has desired a broad goal and left it up to the CSU how to get there. And then we internally have gotten together, strategized, and came up with policies and practices that have dramatically increased our graduation rates. So setting the overall goal is good, not being too prescriptive is excellent. And now we just have to do our own work, the faculty and the administrators, in order to achieve the desired results. But thank you for your response.
Thank you. Lieutenant Governor?
Thank you so much. First, let me just say this is the second time I've seen this presentation, because the first time was when Lande came before the Board of Governors at the Community College. And the reason that I point this out is because I really just want to recognize, Lande, your work in looking at the system as a whole and thinking about how the system of public higher education in the state of California across the three institutions can work better together in order to be able to advance some of these very important issues that you've raised. My comment / question is in the exact same area that Trustee Sebelius's was, which is on metrics. And it does seem to me that graduation rates are a really important metric. And so I just would ask you a little more in your mind, Lande, as we make progress on these goals, to what degree do you expect that graduation rates will improve? And to what degree do you consider some of the other goals of the institution, access, affordability, to also be related? And again, understanding that it's not part of the presentation, but certainly as you have done this work, I can only imagine that you've been thinking about these things. And can you help us kind of think about them in the context of the goals that you talked about today?
Lieutenant Governor, thank you so very much for those kind remarks. Just to speak to your first opening comment, I will say that, I often, when I have the chance to speak with the leaders of our higher education system at the council, encourage them to think about California students as not just being the students that are in our individual systems, but in fact, all of the students in this state are CSU students, even if they are not currently enrolled at the CSU. And I say that because we know that an enormous number of students from K-12 come to the CSU, an enormous number of students from community college come to the CSU. And if we think more holistically about all of our students belonging in all of our systems, it will help us to create the kind of connective tissue that is required for students to have that smooth transition from one system to another. So it really, the idea of looking at this report as a holistic report was really integral to the work. In terms of the metrics piece and thinking through the measurement and metrics, it is essential that we are really thinking about how we get there. I would expect certainly graduation rates to improve without question, but I would also expect to see some other things. I would expect, frankly, to see improvements in retention before I saw improvements in graduation rates. I would expect to see improvements in retention amongst particular student populations who we know are least likely to be retained. I want to see African American males. I want to see Latino males. I want to see those populations that struggle the most have much better outcomes. And that will be one way in which we will know that actually many of the things that we're trying to do here, cultivate a sense of belonging, streamline access to the various segments, ensure that students have an easier time accessing those resources. We will know that the additive effect of all of those things, that will emerge when we start to see the particular student populations who struggle the most in our higher education system begin to persist and complete and succeed at rates far beyond where we are.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Trustee Simon, followed by Trustee Rains.
Well, thank you, Doc. I really appreciated the report, particularly the recommendations. So actually, I have a dual question in terms of the recommendation about creating the CSU creating an intentional DEI plan, strategic plan, and implementation plan for its faculty. I know that this has been a goal that has been spoken by current chancellor. So also, Chancellor, can you talk, I guess I have two questions for the chancellor. Can you talk about your thoughts about that particular recommendation, and what if any sort of movement, even before this presentation, is moving forward on the DEI expansion of the faculty system-wide? And two, Lande, in terms of that, the recommendation, and also, Chancellor, how are you thinking about using this report and the number of recommendations that have been laid out? To the Chancellor and Lande, any comments?
Sure,
Chancellor?
Oh, go ahead, Lande. I'll go after you.
No, I've been speaking, so please, I'd love to hear your voice.
Okay. Well, thank you for the very thoughtful report, Lande, and thank you, Trustee Simon, for your questions. The DEI set of recommendations aligns with my own thinking about what we need to do, and I've been focused on the faculty for the most part in these early months. I do see a great opportunity for us to make progress in that area. And one set of strategies is to look at the programs that we have in place system-wide that are already working on in that area and to scale them up. So Dr. Wood and his team are assessing those opportunities right now. The other opportunity is to work more intensively with the University of California and the community colleges, and perhaps with the private institutions as well. And President Drake and I have discussed the opportunity to strengthen the pathway between the CSU and the UC so that more of our graduates go to the UC to get their doctorates, with the idea that some number, with support, would come back to be faculty in the CSU. And I think the same could be done with some of the private institutions as well. So we're in exploration stages with the University of California in that area. And there already are grant-funded efforts in this area. One is a bridge program that has connected UC and CSU in the sciences and is already making progress. But I think there's much more that needs to occur, and the presidents and I are determined to work collaboratively to make that happen.
I appreciate that. And Lande, before you speak, it's, it's been just in the last 10 days, and a lot of talk about faculty of color not being tenured. Of course, we've heard the North Carolina incident last week, which was shameful and deeply unfortunate. But I wonder, lifting up the current activities around DEI and the recommendation of having a sort of a CSU full commitment in form of a system-wide initiative, I think is something that I would be curious to continue to talk to you about. And then secondly, with that, I don't know if we have an assessment of, again, the statewide, the hiring of faculty of color, disabled folk, protected classes, but it'd be interesting if we have a current assessment, to make sure that it's an ongoing assessment so we can actually see what our warts are, to be able to develop the most, I think, thoughtful, progressive implementation plan system-wide, and to put resources behind it. Of course, resources don't come easy, but again, Lande, I really appreciate you lifting that up, because so much of equity is students being able to see themselves on both sides of the table, in the classroom, the chairs, and in front of the dais. So thank you so much. I'm really inspired by this. And I do hope, Chancellor, that we can really lift that recommendation and others up in this report. Thanks.
Thank you, Trustee Simon. And I really appreciate the comment and the calling out, especially of the atrocious activities at North Carolina, and the ways in which it falls to not just our faculty, though certainly our faculty, but also our governance structures, to be thinking about how do we set a goal and set an agenda and set an environment where we invite not just not just in the future, but in the present, invite the kinds of faculty and staff diversity and inclusion that we wish to see for our institutions, because in fact, that is what makes our institutions much richer. That is what makes our institutions, much more robust now and into the future. And it will, in fact, align with the goals that I think we have across our higher education segments, which is to promote, student diversity and completion, and to do it in ways that really are authentic. So I would welcome, certainly, and I should say that when the report came out and was shared with the council, it was really Chancellor Castro who was the first person to step forward and say, this first goal around diversifying our faculty and staff has got to be elevated. And I really appreciated his support there. That I would continue to advocate not only for thinking about long-term strategies for diversifying our systems and our faculty and staff, but thinking about what needs to happen in the near term, so that we actually are able to benefit the students who are in our institutions today, because they too need to see the tremendous diversity of our governance systems, of our faculty, our staff, and our administrators.
Thank you so much. Thank you both. I appreciate it.
Trustee Raines and then Trustee Rumbulla.
Hi, thank you so much, Chair. And thank you so much, Dr. Ajosi, for this amazing report. I know some of the students that sat on the committee, and they're incredible. And so it's just collaborative and inclusive. And I really commend you for that, first and foremost. And also thank you for the budget, working with the governor to get some of our educational needs met. And we really appreciate that. And also, I loved how at the end of the presentation, you gave a specific recommendation for the Board of Trustees, which was very helpful, very, very helpful. I did have a question regarding one of the goals. And I know there's a lot of legislative bills and a lot of legislative recommendations that have been referenced in the recommendations. And I was wondering, can you talk a little bit about increasing financial aid? I know that was a point in your report, and also perhaps financial aid reform, if that fits in anywhere in the picture. I know there's just a lot of bills going on, and I would like to learn more a little bit about that and how it plays in with the report.
Yeah. So, mindful, the report really was developed between August of 2020 and February of 2021, and mindful that there was a lot happening in the space of financial aid reform and what ought to be taking place there. We did come up with some limited recommendations around financial aid reform, but didn't want to confuse the conversations that were happening. So I think we were very pleased to see in the budget that there was alignment between the governor and the legislature around what we could do to advance and increase Cal Grant accessibility, particularly for community college students, and particularly with an eye to those students being able to take those Cal Grants with them when they transfer to a four-year institution. So that is a big part, I think, in terms of GPA, et cetera, and wanting to make sure that that is no longer a barrier. I will say that, we are always mindful of making promises that we can keep. And so as we continue to think about financial aid reform, we really have to do some good, strong analysis in terms of understanding the impact of changing some of these various requirements that we have so that we can afford to support students in the out years. This year was an unusual budget. If you had told me when I started in the governor's office in 2019 that we'd be in a budget year that we would have seen a $54 billion deficit and then turn around the next year and seen over $100 billion surplus, I wouldn't have believed you. No one would have believed you. So I think that this year really, is an extreme year. And so we really want to make sure that we articulate the balance between what we can afford over the long term and in the out years in terms of ongoing supports and what we can do as one-time monies. And so you'll see in the budget that we have a nice blend between trying to think about, well, how do we take, $2 billion and use that for as an ongoing expense when we know it's only one-time money? And we talked about doing that in terms of student housing, because we know that housing insecurity is such a significant challenge for students. And if we can actually help students with housing affordability, it helps students with that piece of higher education, which is the highest growth cost within their higher education budget. So that was really the approach that we took to the budget. And we're very pleased that we had a number of really significant investments in higher ed. I never would have believed we would have so many investments that started with a B instead of an M. So we're really excited about what that means for the future of our higher education systems, and really want to continue to work with you and with CSSA and with other student leaders, as well as our higher education segments, to ensure that we get the balance right within the available resources.
And that's amazing. I would like to make one more follow-up comment. I just want to thank you so much. I've heard so much about you from other student leaders, and you truly inspire everybody. Every student leader that I've talked to, they say wonderful things about you. So it's an honor to, be in the same space with you. So thank you for being wonderful to our student leaders.
Oh, I tell students all the time, I do this because of students. I have very deep memories myself of being a student and what it was like to get through college and graduate school. And I come to this work with a deep pervasive, unyielding commitment to the student experience and to making sure that our higher education institutions are there doing what I know they are committed to doing, which is to meeting our students' needs. And so I just want to thank you for your leadership, because without students who are willing to step up and step into these spaces, the student experience would be less known. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Trustee Ramgoolen.
Lande, thank you so much to you, to the rest of the task force members for what's in here. At some point during your presentation, you noted how important it was that we think about ourselves as a learner-centered institution. And I think it's critical for students and young people and not so young people who are in our system that we do that, and that we aren't just doing the best we can within our walls, but that we are doing that in coordination with our community college system, with our UC system, and truly thoughtful to the experience start to finish. So much in this report resonates deeply from the work that we've been doing here in Fresno that you mentioned, and that we're going to expand to other communities as well. In terms of a K-16 collaborative, we've heard so much the need to do that. And just personally and professionally, so many of these recommendations hit home in terms of how important they are to ensure the success of every student who comes on to our campuses. So thank you for the tremendous work, for the tremendous report and recommendations. I think they're deeply needed and important. The question I have today, though, Lande, is not for you. It's Chancellor Castro to you. Maybe it's to you, Trustee Steinhauser or Chair Kimball. I want to ensure that we don't see this report today and everyone just says, amazing, great job. Let's make sure we do something about that. And then amidst the hubbub of meetings every 2 months, move to all of the other incredibly urgent, important work and forget these recommendations. I immediately, after reading this, went back to all of the bills moving through and began to say, which of these align to these recommendations? So where might we actually begin to do that? Far be it from me with a title and a couple of sentences, though, to do that well. I wonder whether we could come back to this report and so far, it's been an information item. I don't know if there's an action we as a board should take or need to take to cement that we actually want to look back at this with some level of regularity, and also look at our advisory task force that you pulled together, Chancellor Castro, is so aligned to what's happening here. I think the more we can see all of the work we're doing through the lens of how is this feeding into broader work, would be really powerful. So I guess my question is there a way in which we can take some action, or is this something we're already planning to do, and each of us as trustees and I individually should hold us accountable to coming back and making sure?
If I could just answer quickly, at least from my perspective, if you finished and you went on to the new graduation initiative, that we're going to be presented with next. I think there's so much alignment between that, what we're already, going to be doing and have been doing, and this report. And we will be getting, as we do with the graduation initiative in the past, we will be getting reports on what's happening with that. So, Chancellor, if you wanted to add anything.
I agree with you. I think let's see how this next item goes, and if you wish to do more than that, we can talk about how to proceed. Chair Kimball and also Chair Steinhauser.
Thank you. And we have another comment, Trustee McRory.
You're on mute.
Yeah.
Of course. Okay, I'll try again. Lanny, I know the master plan for higher education in the state hasn't been, I don't think it's been updated since it was created in 1960. I thought I'd heard along the way there was a task force that was working on that. Are these recommendations going to be folded into that group's work so that they're coordinated, or what's going to happen there?
Thank you for the question. It was, I think, Assemblymember Berman who had a select committee looking at the master plan. That effort began, I believe, in 2018, and for the most part concluded in 2020. I believe there is a report out. We have been in conversation with Assemblymember Berman about this work, and he actually has some legislation that is focused on the Common Course numbering issue, and is very active this year in many items related to higher education in terms of his own legislation. I guess what I would say about the master plan itself is, although the master plan has not been formally updated since its inception in the 1960s, there have been in the 60 years since the master plan a minimum of 10 separate review processes of the master plan where new master plans have been, or the idea of new master plans have been put forward. I guess I am personally not of the opinion that another master plan is needed as much as the political will to look at many of those reports that have already been developed and decide that we're actually going to take up some of those really difficult propositions that come out of those processes, so that we can actually advance on the master plan and amplify what existed in 1960. Some of those things I think are actually contained within this report. Things like, how do we think about the integration with K-12? How do we think about strategies like dual enrollment? So, one of the challenges of the master plan was that the linkage between K-12 and higher ed. And so we really tried to build on that. And the other thing I think about the master plan that people don't often pay as much attention to is the fact that the master plan came without a revenue source. And so as the student population in the state of California changed for higher education, and while most people look at those changes and assume it's from people coming to California from out of state, the actual biggest bump in the student population in the 60s and 70s that made the master plan obsolete was actually the number of women who were entering higher education. So it's important that we actually meet the needs that we have today, as we are attentive to the aspirations of the master plan, but go beyond it to really focus much more on execution.
And Dr. Josie, on behalf of the entire board, I want to thank you. This is my first time meeting you, so you're very passionate and a person after my own heart for student success. And I've seen firsthand what happens when communities work together and collaborate and change the lives of students. One recommendation I would have is to take some of your recommendations and meet with Linda Darling-Hammond and incorporate them into the K-12 dashboard, because that's where a lot of accountability for K-12s will come. So keep up the great job, and thank you so much.
I thank you very much. I've had lots of conversations with Linda, and I'm actually trying to make this presentation before the state board as well. But I really just want to thank all of you again for your leadership. California would be nothing if it were not for its higher education systems. And we all know that the CSU is the people's university. And I'm just enormously grateful to all of you for your leadership. I will be following the conversation that will happen now about the graduation initiative. I do think there's lots of alignment, but to Romy's earlier point, there are lots of places where we can actually articulate metrics related to both recovery with equity and related to the graduation initiative that I think can help to advance both efforts. So thank you both. Thank you all again for the invitation and the opportunity to present.
Thank you so much. And as we've heard, our next item, item number 5, is an information item on the Graduate Initiative 2025, and Dr. Wood and Dr. Gold are going to take that lead.
Yes, thank you, Chair Steinhauser. And again, Dr. Josie, thanks for joining us. It was great to hear your presentation. It's now our pleasure to provide a periodic update information item on the Graduation Initiative 2025. As you know, this is our flagship student success effort to close equity gaps and, of course, improve graduation rates for all students. Since the initiative's inception in 2015, our 23 campuses have taken on its audacious goals, investing resources, passion, and creativity to support our students like never before. We are grateful that both the governor and the state legislature share our vision, as they have committed to fully funding this vital priority for the upcoming year. Thanks to the continued investment by the state and also by the generosity of external supporters like Mackenzie Scott. And through the resilience of our students, faculty, and staff, today I'm very proud to say that despite the global pandemic for the ages, the California State University recently celebrated its largest graduating class ever. In May, we marked the accomplishments of more than 130,000 graduates in the CSU. And while we won't have the final data to report until the fall, we know that our graduation rates have been at all-time highs for students of all backgrounds. With our continued support, our first-year students joining us this fall will be our class of 2025. And so as we look ahead to the finish line, we want to remember to absolutely refuse to leave anyone behind. So today you will hear how the CSU is refocusing our efforts to close the persistent equity gaps to make sure that all students are well equipped to join our future workforce, to reach their dreams and their full potential, and to contribute to California's prosperity and success. This slide summarizes a number of significant graduation initiative 2025 milestones that we have achieved over the past 5 years, from working collaboratively with our first graduation initiative advisory committee to set goals, devising the guiding strategies, forming expert work groups to inform our approach, and then recently convening an advisory committee to really catalyze our equity gap closing efforts, and then to continue to engage, of course, our entire CSU community in strengthening our collective commitment to student success and equity. To provide further details about the advisory committee's work and the recommendations I'm joined today by Assistant Vice Chancellor for Student Success Initiatives, Research and Innovation, Dr. Jeff Gold. Jeff was very instrumental in helping to facilitate the committee's collective efforts, and we are very appreciative of his efforts and guidance. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jeff.
Thanks so much, Dr. Wood. Good afternoon, everyone. As evidenced by Dr. Ajose's description of the state's Recovery with Equity Task Force, there is a strong alignment between efforts across the state and our ongoing efforts through Graduation Initiative 2025. We share a commitment to a more equitable future for California, one in which every student has the opportunity to reach their full potential. Now, as we pass the midpoint of Graduation Initiative 2025, we can do so celebrating the steady progress towards the ambitious goals first set forth in 2016. Despite the significant challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic, the CSU community persevered, and graduation rates not only held steady, they rose to unprecedented levels. Yet the CSU is committed to doing even more. This means ensuring that all students, regardless of background, have every opportunity to earn a high-quality CSU degree. This will require each and every one of us to have an even greater focus on eliminating equity gaps at all 23 campuses. This January, in one of his first acts as our new chancellor, Joseph Castro convened an advisory committee for Graduation Initiative 2025 with the goal of providing additional recommendations for eliminating equity gaps across the CSU while advancing our graduation rate goals. The role of the advisory committee is not to rethink the graduation initiative, but rather to build on campus accomplishments with greater intensity and collective impact. Drawing upon a depth and breadth of expertise, the advisory committee is comprised of CSU presidents, provosts, and vice presidents for student affairs, along with academic senators, student leaders, campus administrators, a member of the CSU Alumni Council, and 2 trustees. Today, I am pleased to provide a brief overview of the committee's key recommendations. Additional details are provided in the report that was shared with you prior to today's meeting. The first recommendation is to deepen our focus on courses in which students are most likely to earn a non-passing grade and identify opportunities to enhance student success while maintaining academic rigor and the depth of experience. This might mean, for example, embedding tutoring or other support services within the course, or it might require adjustments to the pedagogy that foster a more inclusive and interactive learning environment. While failing a course presents a challenge for all of our students, the impact on graduation is disproportionately negative for students of color and for those who are the first in their family to attend college. To foster equitable opportunities to earn a CSU degree, we must ensure that students who are willing to put in the hard work have every opportunity to succeed regardless of their background or their life circumstances. The second recommendation is to ensure that every student at the CSU has a clear pathway to meeting their educational goals. A number of campuses have incorporated technology, including degree planners, to support and complement academic advisement. The committee recommends that this practice be adopted system-wide to ensure equitable access for all CSU students. Third, the committee recommends that the CSU redouble its efforts to disseminate student equity data with greater transparency among faculty, staff, and administrators in all departments and divisions across the CSU. The goal here is to shine a spotlight not only on our greatest successes, but also on our largest and most stubborn equity challenges, and then to set our talented team, 55,000 strong, to solve these issues together. Fourth, the committee recommends a more strategic approach to ensuring that students have access to the courses they need when they need them, a stronger commitment to fully fund the campus course schedule as a priority. By better understanding student demand, including lessons learned in our pivot to virtual instruction, as well as incorporating degree planner information into the course scheduling process and leveraging data to strategically offer new course sections, students will be afforded more equitable opportunities to complete their degree requirements. And finally, the committee recommends making resources available to help meet the basic needs of all CSU students. The pandemic magnified the detrimental impact food and housing insecurity can have on student success. Promoting the well-being of our students is central to eliminating equity gaps and facilitating timely graduation. These recommendations, as outlined in the committee report, have now been presented to Chancellor Castro for further consideration. I would like to conclude today by extending my heartfelt gratitude to the members of the advisory committee, with a special shout out and thank you to trustees Steinhauser and Fong for sharing their time and expertise to ensure that student success is always placed at the center of everything we do. Dr. Wood, I turn it back to you.
Well, thank you, Jeff, again, for all your great work on this and for sharing the committee's thoughtful recommendations with us today. I'd like to also add that the committee and our CSU team have identified several other themes that intersect with these 5 recommendations based on their extensive experience in looking at the data and in their experience in working with students. These things include, for example, and related to the report we just heard, issues around campus climate and accountability, as was mentioned, and also budget allocation to be sure the funds flow in the right direction. These themes are highlighted in the report that we provided you as well. As we consider these recommendations, we do so with a deep appreciation for the resources that make it possible to create tangible change system-wide. And as we move forward with the shared responsibility to make our efforts transparent and our outcomes transparent, to be sure that we own the data and work hard to improve it. As I close our presentation today, I'd like to recognize and also emphasize that each one of our graduates, every one of them, represents a very distinct and individual success story. And then collectively, our graduates tell the great success story of our communities and of California, a story shaped in large part at the CSU by Graduation Initiative 2025. We can take pride in their achievements, and yet we know there is still critical work ahead of us on these fronts. Equity gaps remain stubborn, but we are more committed than ever to closing them. We know we can, and we know we must. We must do better so that every student who seeks a CSU degree may have their own graduate success story to share with others. We know that eliminating equity gaps cannot be achieved by one department or by one division or even one campus. It will require all of us, a collective commitment by all of us to envision a more equitable future and one that we believe is well within our reach. My thanks again to Jeff and to the DI 2025 Advisory Committee. Chair Steinhauser, this concludes our presentation, and we're happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wood and Dr. Gull, for this excellent presentation. And I see that Trustee Raines has her hands up first. Trustee Raines, and then Trustee Adamson.
Thank you both for your wonderful presentation. I'm always excited to learn about what our GI 2025 goals have been every single year. So thank you for that. I was wondering, in regards to our goals, how are we diversifying our faculty and staff? And specifically, how are we going to be using that funding that we got approved for basic needs, specifically for mental health? Because I'm interested in, do we plan to hire, as a part of our GI 2025 strategy, more counselors of color?
We've had some, thank you, Trustee Rainsford, for that question. I appreciate it very much. Yes, we are absolutely looking closely at what we can do to diversify our counseling core, as well as all our faculty, as we discussed earlier. We have a lot of different approaches that we're going to be using to really move the needle on that, because we know how critically important it is for students to work with faculty and counselors that can really relate to them and understand their circumstance. So that is absolutely our plan as we work through the budget. You'll be hearing more about the budget in a bit, and that's been high on the list for us to do.
Thank you.
Trustee Adamson and then Trustee Carney.
Assistant Vice Chancellor Gold, as you were talking about in particular the improvement of critical course availability, I heard you speak of funding at the campus level, et cetera, in order to meet these critical course needs. Did your task force also look beyond just a individual campus solution to more of a system solution to critical course availability and the ability perhaps for a student at one campus that may not be able to meet that critical course need to be able to take it at another campus, particularly now that we have courses that are being offered virtually?
Yeah, that's a great question, Trustee Adamson. Thank you for that. And we did discuss it. I will say that there are many things that we discussed that didn't make it into the report. It was a lightning 3.5 months. And so we didn't have time to put everything in. But yes, in fact, across the CSU, we currently have a program that does exactly what you're saying. And part of the recommendations when we have a conversation with Chancellor Castro is to talk about taking that program and maybe notching it up a little bit. So it's a program that has fairly boutique usage when compared to the number of students in the CSU. But the good news there is that we have already set up the protocols and the system for making it go. We just have to analyze what it will take. And especially given the last 1.5 years of virtual courseware, we're now in a different place than we have been over the last decade. So very good question. Thank you.
Good. I'm glad to hear that, because I think as a system, we have the unique ability to offer that type of a program. And I think if the students knew about it, and we were able to ramp it up, it might be more than a boutique as we move forward.
Thank you. Trustee Carney.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank the advisory committee and the staff of the Chancellor's office for an absolutely excellent report. I think this is exactly what we need to do next with the Graduation Initiative 2025. But I'm curious about when we will hear about this next. Since this report is just going to the Chancellor, what do we expect the next steps might be, and when might the board hear further about this and its implementation?
So yeah, go ahead, Chancellor. No, I was going to turn to you, so thank you.
Well, I'm definitely interested in hearing your thoughts about these recommendations today. And then I'd like to speak with the presidents about this at our meeting in August. And then we can come back to you after that, Trustee Carney, with an update on next steps. You'll see the budget part of this is coming next. And so our budget and our policy strategies are aligned in that way.
Thank you. And Trustee Arambula.
Second time I'm saying thank you for a really amazing report, and to everyone who contributed to this. So many of these are really important recommendations that I think are going to help move us closer to our the outcomes we all hope for through Graduation Initiative 2025. I'm very interested to think about, as we're 5 years in, it seems that one of the pieces I read in the report specifically on page 10, it said that one of the goals now is to unify and amplify the practices and policies. We wanted that as a guiding principle. I'm interested to know what that means for us as trustees. Should we expect to see more of the great ideas that have been bubbling up on one campus or a handful of campuses to come to this full board as recommendations and new policies across all 23 campuses? Should we expect that there are different strategies of how this will get cemented on each campus? I just want to know how we can continue to move forward and support these recommendations.
Yeah, so maybe I'll jump in and I'll turn it to whoever would like to talk about it next. I'll tell you, maybe personally, I was struck, and I welcome the fellow committee members to join in, by how willing the committee was to capitalize on the great work already happening and learn from each other, not so much in a voluntary way like we've always done, but in a, with more of a, in some cases, a gentle push, and in some cases, Trustee Arambula, sometimes maybe with some policy changes, frankly, so that everyone's doing the same thing. I think where you see that most commonly and most overtly is with the degree planners, the digital degree planners. Some of our campuses from the very first day, even before you arrive on campus, your whole roadmap of every course you need to take and when you need to take it and how it's scheduled out. You could schedule out your 4 years before you even arrive on campus. And if you make a little detour, your roadmap is right there to get updated to help you get back on track. Now, that is not consistently the case on all campuses. And that was one where the committee felt very strongly that we need to, as a system, maybe exert a little bit more pressure or support to help campuses so that maybe a year from now, that's true for all students. And again, with a focus on equity, we know it's one thing for a student that has been born into privilege, has both parents who went to college, gets off track and has plenty of resources. But especially for students who don't have that support network, these degree plans is just as one example. These digital degree plans are so critical to fostering their success.
Any other questions or comments?
Trustee Steinhauser, I'll just add to Jeff's comment. Trustee Arambula, I think it's a great question. And I can just tell you that even in my short time with you, I may say a couple words about this tomorrow, but Chancellor Castro has really done a terrific job in sort of raising the expectations. And I think that's so important around this work. We own the data now. We share it with each other. We're sharing best practices together. We're looking at ways people have been successful, asking them how they've done it, how can we apply that more broadly. So I absolutely believe, I'm very optimistic that you'll see changes around the types and policies and so forth that you asked about.
And Dr. Wood and Dr. Gold, and I just want to thank you publicly for all the work that you did and all those who were involved behind the scenes. I know that Wenda will agree with me that it was an amazing committee, amazing work, people working really hard. And Trustee Arambula, people were very committed of taking the best practices and moving them system-wide so that we close equity gaps with all 23 campuses. And I'm just thankful I had the opportunity to participate. So thank you both so much. And then Dr. Wood, you're a busy person today. So our next item 6, is going to be presented. It's regarding the post-pandemic student experience. And Dr. Wood and Dr. Hung will do the presentation. So I'll turn it to you, Dr. Wood.
Thank you again, Chair Steinhauser. This afternoon, we're going to wrap up part 3 of our 3-part series on the post-pandemic university. If you'll recall, our May presentation focused on academic planning, how our campuses shape coursework to meet student, workforce, and societal demands. Then in June, we dove deeply into the world of online education, and its potential to broadly support student and faculty success at the CSU well into the future. Today, we're going to illuminate an often unseen yet extremely important network of campus programs and services that form a foundation for student success. These vital services, housed under the broad umbrella of student affairs, strategically support, guide, sustain, and engage our diverse students. And they are carefully designed to provide a sense of agency and belonging that our students need to persist and graduate. Really, never before has this been more essential than during the COVID-19 pandemic. So in this presentation, you will hear more about the many ways Student Affairs supports our students, the philosophy that underscores their work, and how they continue to ensure our students' well-being and academic progress, particularly during a crisis. The lessons learned and the discoveries made during this most difficult year, I believe, will continue to enrich the CSU student experience for years to come. These critical elements complement the substantial and laudable work of our faculty, which was highlighted in the first two items of the series. So it is now my sincere pleasure to introduce Dr. Lolo Hong, Associate Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs and Enrollment Management. Lolo.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wood. Aloha mai kako, everyone. As was the case in cities throughout our nation, our most vulnerable students grapple with some of the most significant impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. It was not unusual for students to find themselves facing financial, food, or housing insecurity, such as Brian from Chico State. He shares, "I was living in my car. The university has many resources like the pantry and housing and university jobs. I was able to make some connections and get some housing and work here at the university. They gave me housing, which is huge." The population of students in need also grew significantly, many of whom were asking for assistance for the very first time. As Regina from Sacramento State observed, our staff were poised and waiting when students were ready to ask for help. A lesson I've had to learn over the years is that it's okay to accept help. And sometimes a student just isn't ready to ask, but letting them know that if they ever do need it, it's here. I think Sac State does a really good job of waiting for students to be ready. As did our academic affairs colleagues, student affairs educators stepped up and leaned in to meet students where they were during this unprecedented time through public health crisis, economic distress, and social justice disruption. Next slide, please. To help illustrate the size and diversity of the students we serve, we've previously shared this CSU as 100 students graphic. You can see, for example, that if we were to take a sample of 100 students from fall 2020, half would be entering as first-time freshmen and half would be upper division transfer students. Further, more than half of all CSU students report being the first in their family to attend college. 50% of undergraduates receive a Pell Grant, and nearly 3/4 of CSU students identify as Black, Indigenous, or people of color, or BIPOC. Understanding and honoring the backgrounds, experiences, and identities of the students whom we serve is important as we consider how we will best support their higher education access and attainment. Student affairs professionals are particularly essential to building bridges, eliminating barriers, re-envisioning services, and providing safety networks for students who have historically been underserved by higher education. You heard earlier from our colleagues regarding the CSU Signature Strategic Effort, Graduation Initiative 2025. As Dr. Gold shared, that work has been organized across 6 priorities, all of which touch our students' daily lives. For this agenda item, I will be focusing on the pillar that speaks to student engagement and well-being. An extensive body of research and anecdotal evidence consistently demonstrates that the strongest predictors of student persistence are academic preparation and student engagement. Further, student health, defined holistically, is an essential capacity for being an active, engaged learner. A student who fears for their safety or is grappling with untreated mental or medical condition cannot fully or consistently show up for college. And while the CSU can and does have some impact on students' academic preparation prior to coming to college, once our students are admitted and enrolled with the CSU, academic preparation becomes more of a static attribute. However, the potential to enhance student engagement is nearly limitless. Student engagement refers to the degree of psychosocial and physical energy invested on the part of a student in educationally purposeful activities across the entire college experience. Student gains in learning and development are proportional to the extent of the quality and quantity of personal investment. Engagement also comprises how the institution deploys its resources and organizes the curriculum and other learning opportunities to encourage student participation in activities that are linked to student growth and development. In fact, the research has shown that student engagement can be so powerful that can actually create better than expected outcomes given a student's level of academic preparation. They can actually outperform their level of academic preparation. Student engagement, and as such, student affairs work is therefore essential to 1, improving retention rates, 2, closing the educational equity gap, and 3, reducing time to degree. What's more, we know that historically marginalized students can experience a disproportionately greater impact from high impact practices. This has been specifically found among BIPOC, low income, and first generation college students. The National Survey of Student Engagement examines 6 high impact practices in particular. These are service learning, learning communities, research with faculty, internships and field experiences, study abroad, and culminating senior experiences. But there are certainly others as well. Given this, as we look to the future and recalling who we serve, CSU campuses must invest more strategically in student affairs rather than disinvest from student affairs in reaction to fiscal pressures. The key areas in which campus student affairs professionals can contribute to enhancing student engagement can be organized into 3 categories. They are cognitive, which can include such things as quality of learning, level of intellectual challenge, and critical thinking skills, as well as curiosity and resilience. Second, social. These address collaborative interactions, interpersonal skills, discussions across difference and diversity, as well as a sense of belonging. And third, institutional. This encompasses campus climate, learning assistance, student activities, level of support services, and supportive interactions with faculty and staff. And again, it would be important to keep in mind how these experiences may also be impacted by the individual's student background and intersectional identities, as well as systemic racism and other embedded forms of marginalization. Now let's reflect on what this means for student affairs in the CSU. During and prior to the pandemic, basic needs and mental health have been primary areas of focus for many campuses. Yet it is important to understand that the student affairs profession encompasses so much more. We can think of basic needs and mental health as being on the lower rungs of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, comprised of the fundamental necessities required for survival. Once these are met, individuals then seek to meet higher level needs, such as security or a sense of belonging. At the top of the hierarchy is achieving one's full potential. In this regard, in concert with students' classroom experiences, student affairs has the potential to create transformational, transcending experiences for our students. In some cases, student affairs is uniquely situated to promote learning for skills that are especially valued by employers, such as ethical decision-making, leadership, and competency to work effectively with diverse teams. It's also important to distinguish between student affairs, the work, versus student affairs administrative reporting structures. Student affairs work, that which develops and fosters out of classroom student growth and development, can and does occur in units and departments across nearly all cabinet areas, not just in the Division of Student Affairs. The organizational structure of what is administratively housed in the Division of Student Affairs at each of our 23 campuses varies greatly. For example, housing and residential life might report through administration finance or through student affairs, but their commitment to building student communities is the same. In fact, regardless of the reporting line, student affairs professionals are generally unified by a community of practice and common guiding values with a defined body of literature and scholarship. Student affairs can be viewed as an ecosystem of a large portfolio of student services and programmatic offerings. You can advance the first animation, please. Thank you. This slide represents just some of the many areas which comprise student affairs work, regardless of where it may be administratively housed on the campus. This list, I know, is not exhaustive, so let me name just a few at least, if we can advance the animation. Career services, childcare centers, disability services, educational opportunity programs, orientation and transition programs, student conduct, and identity-based centers such as Black Cultural Centers, Dream Centers, Pride Centers, Project Rebound, and veteran student services. When the pandemic hit, many of these areas adjusted in order to support students where they needed it most, including advising, housing, financial aid, identity-based centers, counseling and psychological services, and learning support. However, the pandemic is only one example of how student affairs professionals have pivoted over the years to respond to societal shifts. In the past, student affairs has responded to HIV/AIDS, high-risk drinking, the rise of mental health challenges, and most importantly, the increasing racial and ethnic, economic, and gender diversity of our students. Student affairs has also been at the forefront when responding to issues around freedom of expression and legislative impacts on students, including Title IX regulatory changes in court rulings, as well as changes in regulations affecting Dreamers and shifts in immigration laws. Not surprisingly, our student affairs colleagues found multiple ways to help students adapt to what became the new normal during the pandemic. What we discovered was that many of these changes also created new benefits for our students, including leveraging technology to allow for more flexibility and availability in advising or telehealth, streamlining administrative processes such as offering online self-service scheduling for appointments and digitizing paperwork using electronic signatures, and addressing more holistic student needs such as healthy eating and financial planning, which became very important during the pandemic. Angelique, a member of our advising team, shared, as we all made adjustments for an unknown remote world, as educators, we were able to utilize our diverse skill set to create space to support and connect our students in the Cal State LA community. And as student tutor Kristen observed, as the semester progressed, we realized that we needed to focus on the other dimensions of wellness too. So our focus on intellectual wellness provided beneficial ways to manage students' academic life. There are some additional insights we drew from the pandemic. First, online activities and events afforded increased access for students who may have been more geographically challenged to attend on-campus events prior to the pandemic. These have included programs like esports and virtual mental health support groups. Second, adapting targeted student services like Dream Centers, cultural centers, and other identity-based centers, as well as advising, career development, and learning assistance, we were better able to serve adult, older students, working students, and students with either child or elder care responsibilities. Third, virtual programming transcended physical campus boundaries. Breaking down the traditional barriers that exist between campuses was impactful, and CSU student and faculty participation beyond the home or sponsoring campus was another way to foster community and expand access to support. For example, through the Basic Needs Initiative, the CSU was able to facilitate trainings for basic needs ambassadors across all 23 campuses. Similarly, many students were able to access food pantries at sibling CSU campuses closer to their home during the pandemic. Major keynote speakers hosted by a SoCal campus could be heard by a student in a NorCal campus. Finally, the pandemic also revealed some of the deeper complexities of the challenges students face that faculty and staff may not have as mindfully considered in the past, including the impact of the digital divide and the realities of students residing in multi-generational households, pushing us to expand our definition of basic needs and identify new areas for support programs. It is equally important to recognize that many students thrived in the virtual learning environment. For example, some students experienced higher grades or improved sense of belonging and connection because of the flexibility the virtual environment provided, which allowed them to better balance work schedules, family responsibilities, and transportation or commuting issues. It also allowed students with disabilities in some instances improved, more reliable access to instructional materials and content they needed for the learning to be accessible. As we approach 2025 and beyond, California faces a declining birth rate and fewer numbers of new high school graduates, what enrollment management professionals refer to as the, quote, enrollment cliff, close quote. Yet the need for an educated workforce will continue to increase. To meet our mission, the CSU will have to successfully attract and graduate a different cadre of students, more adult students, more returning students with some college but no degree, as well as first-time older students looking to expand career or employment options. Yet, even more traditional age students are expecting to interact with their campuses in a multitude of modalities. For example, living on campus and being active in associated students and sports clubs while taking the majority of their classes online while wearing their PJs. And campus populations will continue to reflect a greater racial and ethnic diversity. For all students, the expectation to provide holistic support will only grow, and the ability to strategically address wellness and basic needs will become a core expectation. All said, this will necessitate leveraging the experiments of the pandemic and determining what to institutionalize so as to better serve the students of today and tomorrow. These students will demand choice and flexibility when it comes to time, place, and modality of instruction and service provision. As such, in order to move forward in a manner consistent with promoting an equitable post-pandemic recovery, programs and services for enrollment management, student affairs, and diversity, equity, and inclusion will need to strategically and thoughtfully embrace a hybrid approach going forward. I'd like to conclude my presentation today with voices of students, sharing in their own words the profound impact of student engagement and the power of belonging. As one student says, "It gave me home, a community." After the video concludes, Dr. Wood will return to provide some concluding remarks. Thank you.
My name is Joshua Mannering. I'm a third-year computer technology and Asian American studies double major, and I'm affiliated with Bangsi Kapan, the Filipinx American student community on campus. When I got here, I was a first year, and I didn't know too much about the campus. I met so many people that look like me or are just like me, grew up the same way as me. I felt at home, and I felt like I found like a family that I can look to.
College, it was a little rough, you know. When I started here at DH, it was kind of hard just because of the fact that like I was really anxious because I was just kind of alone. I didn't really know anybody. There was just so much anxiety for me. And it wasn't until like one day I asked my friend, I was like, hey, like I really want to go to the QCRC, the Queer Culture Research Center. As a queer student navigating higher ed, that's the space that I've always been looking for, that I never knew that I needed, but I knew that was for me as soon as I got there.
My name is Ronnie Moraga. I am an accounting major here at Cal State Dominguez Hills with a minor in computer information systems, and I'm currently involved in the accounting society here at Dominguez Hills. I joined when I first got here to school, and I've been right in and out, hopefully throughout all the way until I graduate. It takes more than a GPA to get into a good job. You really need to be involved, and you really need to expand your resume to really impress these professionals and help you get that opportunity.
My name is Bethany Scott. I am a psychology major, and I'm also minoring in Asian Pacific Studies. I've always been interested in a lot of Asian culture, specifically Korean culture after I discovered K-drama, but that's not the only thing that interested me. It was also their family culture, their educational values, the way they structure themselves as individuals. So I've always just really admired and just appreciated their culture.
I had this preconceived notion that I didn't want to be here, and I feel like that was more personal reasons as opposed to what that institution actually offered. And what really humbled me a lot is that people I work with put in like 1,000% into me.
And that for me, it was just an extremely humbling experience because it made me see the potential in myself, and it gave me like home, community.
When I first came to Dominguez, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. Getting involved exposed me not only to a lot of different resources here on campus, but it connected me with so many other people on campus. Dominguez Hills is a family, Once a Toro, always a Toro. Once you walk around and you start seeing people, you might think, oh, people aren't as friendly as they say they are. They really are.
I came to the student admin day when the campus and everything was still open, and I looked around and I was just like, okay, let's see, what do they have to offer? What are they providing?
The Career Center was a big help in prepping me for the interviews and giving me advice on what I should work on.
This campus has so many different resources, such as the library, the Toro Learning Testing Center, the Student Health Center, and the LSU, and just so many different things that the campus offers.
College is an investment, so take advantage of these next couple of years so that the rest of your life is just a great one.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Hong, and thanks for adding those student voices. That was great. So earlier today, you heard a presentation related to the Graduation Initiative 2025, the CSU's flagship effort to close those equity gaps and increase graduation rates across the board. Within the next 4 years, as soon as humanly possible, it is one of our CSU's top priorities to permanently eliminate any remaining equity gaps between Pell-eligible, first-generation, and students of color and their peers. To meet this goal, we must ensure that our most vulnerable students, especially those affected most severely by the COVID-19 pandemic, find connection, feel a sense of belonging, and stay with us to graduation. As Dr. Hong so eloquently pointed out, this happens through quality academic preparation for sure, but study after study also show that student engagement is key. While we must certainly continue to champion academic excellence, it is the realm of student affairs and its focus on the student experience that will ensure our continued success. Responding to the pandemic created opportunities for new approaches to student support, from disability resource centers to career services to student organizations. As our campuses consider the critical role of student affairs in supporting student success in the future, these pandemic-era learnings and achievements will help shape our campuses for the better. As many of you know, this will be our last presentation from Dr. Hong. I have greatly enjoyed working with Lolo for the past few months. I found her to be an incredible advocate for our students and their success. She also willingly, time and time again, contributed her talents to a wide range of efforts, both within the Chancellor's office and in helping each and every one of our campuses. Frankly, I'm quite sad that the next Executive Vice Chancellor will not have the opportunity to work with her, but I'm very happy for Lolo as she continues on her journey of leadership excellence and service as the inaugural Vice President of Student Engagement and Wellbeing at Georgia Tech. Once again, Lolo, our sincere thanks for your outstanding work and many contributions to the CSU. Chair Steinhauser, this concludes the item today and concludes our three-part series. Dr. Hong and I will be very happy to answer any questions, and we'll be joined today by Dewan Jackson, Interim System-Wide Director of Student Advising Initiatives, Dr. Leah Jarnigan, Interim System-Wide Director for Student Wellness and Basic Needs Initiatives, and Ray Murillo, System-Wide Director for Student Affairs Programs, so we can benefit from their expertise during the questions and answers as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wood. Are there any questions for our presenters? Trustee Fong, and then we'll go with Trustee Rains.
Well, three excellent and exciting reports. Thank you so much, everyone who contributed to them. And Dr. Hong, I am so surprised and saddened to learn that you are leaving. But gosh, the institution that is inheriting you is so fortunate. And I just have to say what a pleasure it has been for me to work with you, specifically on the GI 2025 committee. I wanted to know what is the strategy and plans for post-pandemic student affairs in the fall, and what examples can you give of the hybrid approach?
Trustee Fong, first of all, thank you for your words, and I will truly miss the CSU and am so grateful for the opportunity to work with you, the entire board, and all of the 23 campuses and those here in the Chancellor's office. So to your question, I think the pandemic afforded an opportunity to develop strategies and utilize solutions, in particular, many that were technology driven, that perhaps in the past there was misgivings about, or we were concerned about whether, can we do this? It hasn't been done. And so I think many of the things that we adopted will continue on. So for example, I think one amazing example is hearing from our career development services directors and how they saw different students who had not accessed their services prior to the pandemic show up for activities and events that they hosted via the virtual platform. And so knowing that that created accessibility and reach for a greater number of students, I think that really signals to many of our campus-based professionals the need to continue to provide services both in person and in virtual and remote formats so students can choose. I also think that this opportunity allowed us to look at, one of the pillars of Graduation Initiative 2025 is to remove administrative barriers. So I need to say, right, the truth is that when we first pivoted during the pandemic last spring, some of the questions that popped up were, so there's a form where I need to change my academic major, but it requires wet signatures from all the people, right, in my department in college. So how do I get my change of major form taken care of? So that sounds so basic, but that was an example of where we were able to pivot. And so, well, let's utilize electronic signatures. Let's transform the form into something that can be online and can be handled remotely for the entire process to make it easier for everyone involved, the students and the faculty and the administrators. So I think these are the kinds of things that we adopted and pivoted quickly during the pandemic will continue on. Same thing, counseling services, all our psych services, we developed a HIPAA compliant Zoom tool so that our practitioners could provide their services in a confidential, sensitive environment, as is important for their profession. That will stay on so that we can offer appointments both remotely and in person. So I think these are just a few of the examples that we've found, and I know from talking to the 23 campuses will persist and be sustained in the coming months.
Thank you. Trustee Rains.
Well, it sounded like you just answered my question, so thank you so much. But I would just like to add just one quick thing. Thank you, Dr. Hong, for all your work for students. I remember meeting you with Ray Murillo at one of the CSSA meetings, one of your first meetings, and it's been an absolute honor to, watch you work with all of these initiatives and work with students. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Trustee Reyes. And CSSA certainly always occupied a special place in my heart.
Are there other questions or comments? Seeing none, Dr. Hong, I just too want to echo my admiration for you. You are one of the most passionate people I've ever seen, and our loss is going to be Georgia's gain, and we expect great things from you. And Dr. Wood and your entire team, thank you for this unbelievably well-developed presentation on equity. And I agree with you that CSU will close these equity gaps. And so, Chair Campbell, this concludes the work of the Education Policy Committee.
Thank you, Chair Steinhauser. Trustee